Living a good life means sharing meals with you every day, sleeping together every night, watching the spring mist rise and the willows turn green. You practice with your spear in front of the pavilion, and I paint. We'll respect each other and grow old together, never abandoning one another. In the 9th year of Yeoman, the kingdom of Huai was at peace, and the capital city of Liang flourished. That year, 2 champions emerged in the imperial exams, one in literature, one in martial arts, one male, one female. The literary champion was named Lu Jisheng, and the martial champion was Jing Ruxiu. In the Golden Palace, the martial champion, Jing Ruxiu, stood true to her name, elegant and graceful with the spirit of a warrior. Her bold words, however, shocked the entire court. "I do not seek wealth or glory," she declared. "I only ask your majesty to grant me marriage to the literary champion, Lu Jisheng." At that moment, the man standing beside her, Lu Jisheng, paled in disbelief, his body trembling. If they had still been at the Lu family home, he would have shouted, "Jing Ruxiu, you're forcing me into marriage." The inscription on the ink-painted folding fan read, "Rivers and mountains as elegant as Ruxiu, songs and dances in harmony with Jisheng." These 8 words were written with flair and elegance, and the seals of both the Lu and Jing families marked it as a betrothal token. Half a year earlier, Jing Ruxiu had closed down her family's escort service, carrying her father's ashes and this fan, and traveled thousands of miles to Liang's capital to find her betrothed, Lu Jisheng. Their engagement had been arranged 17 years ago, when the Lu family had not yet moved to the capital and lived next door to the Jing family. The 2 families were close. On the day of Jing Ruxiu's full moon banquet, when she was just a month old, the 2 families' elders drank in celebration. Lu Jisheng's father, in a moment of drunken inspiration, inscribed the fan and sealed the childhood betrothal. However, the Lu family later moved to Liang's capital, and communication between the 2 families dwindled. With Lu Jisheng's father's passing several years earlier, the marriage agreement had been forgotten. So when Jing Ruxiu arrived at the Lu family's mansion with the fan in hand, dutifully following her late father's wishes to seek her betrothed, her so-called husband spat out his tea and had her thrown out of the house without a second thought. Ridiculous. A female swindler daring to deceive the Lu family. Now the head of the Lu household, Lu Jisheng was renowned for his intelligence and elegance. He managed the vast family estate with meticulous care and was the object of many young noblewomen's affections in the capital. Just as he was preparing to marry the prime minister's daughter, a country girl appeared with an ancient token, claiming to be his childhood fiancé. It was absurd, like something straight out of an overused tale from a storytelling teahouse. But as ludicrous as it was, the story was true. When the old steward of the Lu household confirmed Jing Ruxiu's identity, Lu Jisheng was thunderstruck. He nearly fainted on the spot, and it was only Jing Ruxiu's quick reflexes that kept him from collapsing. "Careful, husband." The word, husband, made Lu Jisheng shudder, and he nearly blacked out again. "Who's your husband?" In the midst of the chaos, Jing Ruxiu somehow ended up staying in the Lu family's home, becoming an unwanted guest that Lu Jisheng couldn't get rid of. Eventually, as the imperial exams drew near, Lu Jisheng, who had been burning the midnight oil, called for Jing Ruxiu as she brought him soup. "It's not that I'm denying our engagement. Do you know what a suitable match means?" Their eyes met in the flickering candlelight, one filled with joy, the other with calculation. Lu Jisheng, ever the schemer, grinned slyly. Everyone in the capital knew that he was aiming to become the top scholar, a feat he hoped would secure his marriage to the prime minister's daughter. But now, with Jing Ruxiu in the picture, he had no choice but to play his final card. "If you can also become a top scholar, I'll marry you. How about that?" The kingdom of Huai was progressive, allowing women to take the imperial exams and even serve in government. However, few women were both talented and willing to step into the public eye. In the candlelight, they shook hands, and Lu Jisheng, confident he had tricked the illiterate Jing Ruxiu, smiled triumphantly. But when Jing Ruxiu later won the title of martial arts champion with her spear, wielding unparalleled strength and grace, Lu Jixing realized he had been the one outsmarted. In the kingdom of Huai, where scholars were revered and warriors often overlooked, a general who could lead armies was a rare gem. The emperor was overjoyed, and seeing the fan as a token of destiny, not only appointed Jing Ruxiu as a general, but also arranged her marriage to Lu Jixing. Amidst the court's congratulations, Lu Jixing gritted his teeth, realizing too late that he had brought this upon himself. On their wedding day, the city was filled with fireworks and celebrations, but one place remained cold and quiet, the bridal chamber in the general's mansion. Under her red veil, Jing Ruxiu's heart went from nervous to expectant, then from hopeful to anxious, until finally, when Lu Jixing lifted her veil, all her anticipation came crashing down. Lu Jixing was drunk. He lifted her chin with his slender fingers, scrutinizing her before sneering mockingly, the disdain in his voice cutting through the air. "Is this fun for you, General Jing Ruxiu? Are you enjoying this?" Their eyes met, their breaths mingled, but Jing Ruxiu's mind was in such a whirl that she stammered. "You said, if I became a top scholar, you'd marry me." "Yes, I did say that." Lu Jixing laughed bitterly, each word dripping with cruelty. "I also said I'd never like you. Do you remember that?" Jing Ruxiu trembled, but Lu Jixing wasn't done tormenting her. His handsome face moved closer, his smile as cold as a snake's hiss. "I will never love you." As fireworks exploded outside, Jing Ruxiu's heart sank. By the time she snapped out of her daze, Lu Jixing had already stormed out of the room, his wedding robe billowing as he left without looking back. That first night of marriage was as cold and lonely as the empty room. Jing Ruxiu sat by the bed, watching the fireworks for half the night. By the time dawn broke, Lu Jixing still hadn't returned. The husband she had practiced saying in her mind for so long never passed her lips. Thanks to the emperor's decree, Lu Jixing, in effect, had married into her household. He moved into the general's mansion with nothing but an old steward, a few belongings, and a white fox named Yao Yao. Watching how Lu Jixing cherished the little fox, holding it tenderly and refusing to let anyone else touch it, Jing Ruxiu awkwardly withdrew her hand, a pang of emotion stirring within her. She thought of the phrase, "to see an object is to miss the person," but in this case it was more like, "to see a fox is to miss a person." And who was that person? Naturally, it was the fox's other owner, the Prime Minister's daughter Yan Shuiyao, who had almost married Lu Jixing. "You and she are world apart," Lu Jixing said sharply as he set up a small bed for the fox, not even glancing at Jing Ruxiu. She had originally come to help but was shooed away, his words leaving her stunned. The old steward coughed awkwardly, knowing she didn't understand the insult, but unable to explain. He could only look at her with sympathy. That night, Jing Ruxiu tossed and turned, unable to sleep. A few days later, she hired a tutor, put down her spear, and picked up a brush, starting her studies from scratch. The first question she asked the tutor was, "Sir, what does world apart mean?" Once she learned the answer, Jing Ruxiu threw herself into her studies with renewed focus. She spent all the time she used to devote to martial arts on learning. Besides her lessons, she learned how to make soup, sew, and even how to care for the fox. "Yao Yao, Yao Yao, come eat." The servants often saw her squatting beside the fox's den, holding food with an eager expression, humbling herself in a way that left them speechless. But the fox was arrogant and aloof. It didn't care whose home it was in. It bit her arm fiercely, and she didn't even dare to shake it off. Despite her martial prowess, she restrained herself, only breaking free when Lu Jixing rushed over. Like an eagle breaking its own wings, the proud General Jing had reduced herself to a mere housewife. Gossip spread throughout the mansion. Even the old steward sighed regretfully. Lu Jixing, of course, noticed all of this. He still mocked her outwardly, but deep down, he felt something stir. He probably didn't realize how much Jing Ruxiu liked him. Since childhood, she had heard her father speak of him, describing him as if he were a god. Elegant, handsome, knowledgeable, Jing's father had painted a picture of Lu Jisheng using his own father as a model. Jing Ruxiu admired this image deeply, and when she looked at the rough men in the escort agency, she couldn't help but compare them. She had built up an idealized image of Lu Jisheng in her mind, and when she finally reached Liang's capital and saw him at the Lu mansion, everything clicked. The man standing before her was exactly the one she had imagined. Without exaggeration, Lu Jisheng was the most handsome, intelligent, and unique man Jing Ruxiu had ever met. She lived in the Lu residence for 6 months, quietly admiring Lu Jisheng from afar the entire time. It wasn't until she finally became his wife, nervously waiting for him in the bridal chamber, that he turned his back and walked away without a second glance. They had a betrothal token. He had promised her. They had even sealed their vow with a handshake. Jing Ruxiu bit her lip, feeling both wronged and heartbroken, but no matter how much she tried, she couldn't bring herself to be angry with him. All she could do was sigh as she watched the fireworks outside the window. This was the difference between loving someone and not loving them. Perhaps it was her sincerity that finally moved him. One day, while bringing him another bowl of soup, Lu Jisheng suddenly took her hand, his expression awkward. The Lantern Festival is the day after tomorrow. Get yourself ready and come with me to see the lanterns. Jing Ruxiu was so stunned that she didn't react for a long moment. When she finally realized what he had said, she was so happy she almost couldn't believe it. Meanwhile, Lu Jisheng avoided her gaze, coughing lightly to cover his discomfort. The Lantern Festival in Liang's capital was always lively and bustling. Jing Ruxiu looked at herself in the mirror over and over again before heading out, her maid laughing behind her, covering her mouth as she teased, "My lady, you look so beautiful today. If you don't hurry, the master will grow impatient." Blushing, Jing Ruxiu rushed out the door. Sure enough, Lu Jisheng was waiting at the front of the mansion. His eyes brightened when he saw her, though he quickly looked away, coughing again. Jing Ruxiu, still a bit dazed, reached out to hold his hand and asked, "Husband, just the two of us?" Lu Jisheng nodded. "Yes, just the two of us." Fireworks exploded in the sky as they walked through the bustling night market, and glowing lanterns floated down the river, drifting far, far away. Jing Ruxiu had never experienced the Lantern Festival in Liang's capital before. She looked around excitedly, her eyes sparkling. Beside her, however, Lu Jisheng seemed distracted. When they stopped at a stall to choose masks, he suddenly asked her, out of the blue, "Hey, you remember the way back to the general's mansion, right?" Jing Ruxiu, focused on picking out masks, replied absent-mindedly, "Yes, of course," and then held up 2 masks with a smile. "Look, husband." But when she looked up, there was no one beside her. Like a gust of wind, Lu Jisheng had disappeared without a sound. Jing Ruxiu blinked, staring at the bustling crowd around her, unmoving for a long time. His words, "You remember the way back to the general's mansion, right?" echoed in her ears. Yes, of course she remembered. The night wind brushed against her face, and it finally hit her. Lu Jisheng had left her, without warning, without a trace. No, perhaps it wasn't without warning. Perhaps it was premeditated. When she saw 2 figures embracing by the riverbank, Jing Ruxiu finally understood. This was the first time she had seen Yan Shuiyao, or rather, the cloud in the phrase worlds apart. Even under the faint moonlight, Yan Shuiyao was beautiful and radiant, her silhouette perfectly matched with Lu Jisheng. Quietly, Jing Ruxiu set down the 2 masks she had chosen, adjusted her robe, and walked away without disturbing them. The fireworks continued to light up the sky, but the wind that swept through her sleeves was freezing cold, leaving her heart feeling empty and hollow. After escorting Yan Shuiyao home, Lu Jisheng wandered the streets for half the night, fingering the mask in his hands, a vague sense of guilt gnawing at him. By the time he drunkenly stumbled back to the general's mansion in the middle of the night, he was surprised to see a light by the door. Jing Ruxiu sat in the cold wind, holding a lantern, waiting for him. As soon as she saw him, She bit her lip and stood up, moving forward to support him. "Careful, husband." It was an unspoken understanding between them, though neither of them voiced it. The more Jing Ruxiu remained silent, the more restless Lu Jisheng became. The frustration built up inside him, making him wish she would just shout at him, demand why he had abandoned her halfway through the night, why he had used her as a cover to meet his former lover. But Jing Ruxiu said nothing. She simply remained quiet, until, finally, Lu Jisheng, unable to bear it any longer, shoved her away. Just as he was about to speak, she lowered her head and softly said, "Husband, I know what worlds apart means now." Her long lashes trembled as she held back her emotions, not daring to get too close to him. She lifted her lantern and walked ahead to light the way for him. Lu Jisheng froze for a moment, watching the slender figure in front of him, her shadow rippling like a lotus on the water. Her voice drifted back to him, soft and determined. "But I'll try my best. I'll work hard to match you, husband. I'll work hard to be the cloud, even though I'm still just mud right now." His drunken mind took a moment to process her words. When he finally understood, Lu Jisheng couldn't help but chuckle softly. His chest tightened with a strange ache as he gazed at her retreating figure, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. A quiet murmur escaped him, carried away by the wind. Silly mud. Like ice melting and snow thawing, with the arrival of spring, some things began to change without anyone noticing. Lu Jisheng no longer spoke to Jing Ruxiu with cold indifference. Sometimes, when he saw her practicing with her silver spear, a hint of approval would even cross his face. On occasion, he'd even sip the soup she made for him. Everything seemed to be moving in a better direction, until an unexpected tragedy struck. The day Lu Jisheng and Yan Shuiyao returned from their outing, the little white fox, Yao Yao, was found poisoned. No one knew when it started, but Yan Shuiyao had begun frequenting the general's mansion, at first under the pretense of visiting Huai Kingdom's first female general. With every Sister Ruxiu and esteemed Lady General, Yan Shuiyao was so warm and enthusiastic that Jing Ruxiu was caught off guard and couldn't refuse her advances. In the end, Jing Ruxiu clumsily agreed to accompany Yan Shuiyao on a spring outing, along with Lu Jisheng. By the time Jing Ruxiu sensed something was wrong, the awkward trio had already become a regular occurrence. Feeling like an outsider, Jing Ruxiu eventually claimed illness and withdrew. She didn't go on the outing this time. Before leaving, Lu Jisheng even reached out to touch her forehead, his tone full of concern. "If you're not feeling well, rest early. We'll be back soon." Leaning against the doorway, Jing Ruxiu mumbled an acknowledgement, almost convincing herself that she really was ill. Once back in her room, she crawled under her blankets and drifted off into a restless sleep, her forehead burning hotter and hotter, as though trapped in a nightmare. By the time the sun was setting, her door was violently kicked open, and a hand yanked her out of bed. She groggily opened her eyes, only to meet a pair of terrifying, enraged eyes, like she had plunged into yet another nightmare. She had never seen Lu Jisheng look so terrifying, his fury like that of a tiger ready to devour its prey. "Jing Ruxiu, I never thought you could be so vicious." Still in her night clothes, hair disheveled, she was dragged through the mansion by Lu Jisheng, stumbling under the watchful eyes of the entire household. The courtyard was filled with people. At its center knelt a tearful Yan Shuiyao, crouched beside the fox's den, cradling the small, bloodied body of the white fox, Yao Yao, in her arms. "Yao Yao, Yao Yao." She cried out in grief. Jing Ruxiu's mind was in chaos, completely at a loss for what was happening. It wasn't until Lu Jisheng grabbed her wrist and threw her to the ground that Yan Shuiyao's accusation reached her ears. "Sister Ruxiu, why did you poison Yao Yao? She was raised by Ah Sheng and me. Why were you so cruel?" Jing Ruxiu's body trembled as she looked up at the lifeless fox, stunned and in disbelief. Lu Jisheng demanded that she confess, insisting that she had poisoned Yao Yao while they were out on their excursion. "If you admit your mistake, I'm willing to believe that it was an accident." In the cold wind of the night, candles flickered inside the mansion. Lu Jixing stood by the bedside, watching the woman lying on the bed with a tight grip on the quilt, her long hair cascading down. Her lips were pressed together tightly, like a silent statue. She stared at the red candle, her voice soft yet firm as she said, "No, I won't admit to it." Although she had fed the fox while they were gone, she hadn't poisoned it. And she certainly hadn't acted out of jealousy or malice, as Yan Shuiyao had tearfully claimed in the courtyard. "I know it's my fault, that I shouldn't have stayed close to Sheng, making you upset enough to hurt Yao Yao." With Yan Shuiyao's pitiful cries, the incriminating evidence, the clear motive, and the collective judgment of the household, Jing Ruxiu was condemned as the wicked stepmother. No one believed her, least of all the furious Lu Jixing. But only Jing Ruxiu knew the truth. No matter how much she humbled herself, she could not, in good conscience, take the blame for this crime. He could choose not to love her, but he couldn't trample on her heart. As the wind battered the window panes, for the first time, Jing Ruxiu did not back down. She straightened her spine and held back her tears, locking eyes with Lu Jixing, no longer the meek woman she once was. "You're wronging me. I won't admit to something I didn't do, nor will I want it. You don't have to love me, but you cannot falsely accuse me." Her tone wasn't harsh, but it carried a quiet strength, mixed with a kind of lonely bravery. Her fever-flushed cheeks looked even more sorrowful under the candlelight. Lu Jixing didn't know what to say. His chest tightened painfully as he struggled to control his emotions. Finally, his voice trembled as he spoke. "If your way of loving me means destroying everything, I'd rather not have it." Wanting to escape something, maybe himself, he turned abruptly and left, without looking back, throwing one last cold remark over his shoulder. "I'll be moving back to the Lu mansion for now. Take care of yourself." Jing Ruxiu's face turned deathly pale, her eyes wide with shock, as tears welled up, blurring her vision. She watched helplessly as Lu Jixing walked out, just like he had on their wedding night. But this time, she knew he wouldn't be coming back. Her fragile body, held together by sheer willpower, finally gave in. Coughing violently, she curled up, clutching the quilt, the only warmth she had left. Tears burst forth, flooding her world. "Husband, please believe me. Don't go." She cried quietly, full of grief and pain, from her fingertips to her heart. But the figure she called out for was already gone, too far away to hear her. As the tears continued to fall, a memory suddenly surfaced, when he had first come to live with her, alone and empty-handed. He had arrived like a guest, never intending to stay in the general's mansion for the rest of his life. It was only she who had foolishly tried, again and again, to keep him, to make him her husband forever. Jing Ruxiu lay bedridden for 2 months, recovering from her illness. During this time, Lu Jixing never came to visit her, leaving only his meticulous old steward to oversee the general's mansion. Every day she asked about him. She asked so often that the old steward couldn't bear to answer her anymore, his heart heavy with sympathy. In the end, someone always has to lower their head first. When Jing Ruxiu finally recovered, she made a pot of soup and stood in the wind outside the Lu mansion, waiting for Lu Jixing. But the person she saw wasn't him. It was Yan Shuiyao. Yan Shuiyao had come to invite Lu Jixing to go hunting in the Western Hills. Upon seeing Jing Ruxiu, she smiled as if it were no surprise. "Sister Ruxiu, you've grown thin." Jing Ruxiu lowered her gaze and didn't respond, only tightening her grip on the soup she held. When Lu Jixing stepped out of the mansion, both women looked up at him. He paused, clearly surprised. Before Yan Shuiyao could call out Sheng, Lu Jixing hesitated for a moment, then walked over to Jing Ruxiu's side and asked in a low voice, "Are you feeling better now?" They stood close together. Jing Ruxiu murmured a soft their breath mingled, and Lu Jixing continued, "So, have you realized your mistake?" Jing Ruxiu looked up, meeting Lu Jixing's conflicted gaze. Her heart trembled, and a wave of bitterness washed over her, forcing her to lower her head and clutch the soup tightly. No, Rushio is not wrong. Rushio came to bring her husband home. Her voice was soft but firm, catching Lu Jisheng off guard. The tenderness in his eyes disappeared, replaced by a sudden coldness. The air chilled in an instant. With a harsh flick of his sleeve, Lu Jisheng's face hardened. I won't drink your soup. Go away. I'm afraid you'll poison me. With that, he walked past her, took Yan Shuiyao's hand, and helped her into the carriage. They rode off together, leaving a trail of dust behind. As the carriage headed toward the western hills, Jing Rushio stood there watching it disappear, gripping the soup even tighter. An uncontrollable impulse surged within her, and she turned back toward the general's mansion, grabbed her silver spear, mounted her horse, and raced after them. They were going hunting, weren't they? Well, she would join them. She was his lawfully wedded wife. How could he keep abandoning her like this? The wind howled as her robes billowed behind her. Jing Rushio's heart raced, and she clutched her spear tightly. If she had followed them before out of a sense of pride, by the time she reached the western hills and saw the scene before her, she could only feel relief. It was a good thing she had followed them. In the forest, birds scattered in fright as a group of assassins, dressed in black, surrounded Lu Jisheng and Yan Shuiyao, their intent clear and deadly. Husband, Jing Rushio cried out, her spear slicing through the air, scattering fallen leaves as she charged toward Lu Jisheng. He hadn't brought many men with him, and they were struggling against the attackers. From afar, he saw Jing Rushio rushing toward him, and his pupils shrank. Rushio, run. This ambush was not to be underestimated. It had been carefully planned. 2 months ago, Lu Jisheng had been sent to Jiangnan by imperial decree to investigate a corruption case, offending many entrenched interests. Now, on his return, those he had angered were taking their revenge. A brutal battle was inevitable. Yan Shuiyao, terrified, clung to Lu Jisheng, trembling uncontrollably. She screamed toward the approaching figure, Sister Rushio, help me. Though still weak from her illness, Jing Rushio's spear was unstoppable. She carved a path through the attackers, creating an opening for Lu Jisheng and Yan Shuiyao. Husband, you two go. I'll hold them off. Get help. Time was running out. In the chaos, Lu Jisheng, focused on protecting Yan Shuiyao, gritted his teeth and fought his way out of the encirclement, racing on horseback toward the city for reinforcements. Only when she saw that they were safely away did Jing Rushio finally breathe a sigh of relief. But just as she did, her horse let out a pained scream, blood splattering everywhere as she was violently thrown to the ground. A wave of attackers descended upon her like a flood. The clash of swords filled the air, blood spattered the ground. Husband, you must come back. She muttered under her breath, thrusting her spear forward, blood splashing across her face. Lu Jisheng, however, didn't make it back in time. Perhaps out of fear, halfway to the city, Yan Shuiyao had a sudden heart attack. Lu Jisheng had no choice but to stop and find the nearest clinic to care for her. By the time he returned with reinforcements, 2 hours had passed. 2 hours, enough time for far too many things to happen. Lu Jisheng was trembling all over as he raced back, barely able to breathe from fear. When he and his men finally arrived in the western hills, the sun was setting, casting the forest in a bloody light. The battle had long since ended. Corpses lay strewn across the ground, the trees cut down, and the air thick with the stench of blood. There was only one word to describe the scene: horrific. In the middle of the blood-soaked battlefield stood a figure, barely recognizable. Her silver spear was nearly slipping from her hand, and her slender frame was trembling, yet she still stood tall, as if holding on to something. Lu Jisheng would never know how Jing Rushio, after fighting until she was on the brink of collapse, had waited in growing terror as no one came to her rescue. Her vision blurred with blood, and the pain screamed through her entire body. She trembled uncontrollably, more afraid than she had ever been in her life, praying desperately for him to return. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was only afraid of being forgotten, of being abandoned by her husband. But he had abandoned her. Perhaps it was the desperation of being driven into a corner that had given her the strength to keep fighting. No one came to save her. She could only rely on herself. Her silver spear danced like a dragon, slashing through the attackers, the blood spraying from her sleeves like flowers blooming in hell, painting the sky red. The sun sank below the horizon, and the forest fell into a long, chilling silence. Yet she still knelt in the blood, her body rigid and unmoving. Ruxiu. Lu Jisheng's voice broke as he choked out her name, his body trembling as he took slow, agonized steps toward the bloodied figure. Jing Ruxiu's body stiffened, and she slowly raised her head, her eyes dull and unfocused. It wasn't until she fell into Lu Jisheng's arms that she seemed to return to life. Her eyes filled with tears as something warm and wet slipped down her face, mingling with the blood that soaked her clothes. "Husband, I thought you didn't want me anymore." In the general's mansion, Lu Jisheng stood by the bedside, looking at the unconscious Jing Ruxiu, his voice trembling. "What you said, is it really true?" The old steward beside him nodded heavily, guilt etched on his face. "It's true. I should have spoken sooner. If I had, Madam wouldn't have suffered so much." 2 months ago, the emperor secretly ordered Lu Jisheng to investigate corruption in Jiangnan. At the same time, the incident with the poison fox occurred. Angry and disappointed, Lu Jisheng used the excuse of moving back to the general's mansion to cover his tracks while he conducted his investigation in secret. The old steward, not wanting to distract him at such a critical moment, hadn't revealed the truth at the time. Now, looking at Jing Ruxiu, injured and lying in bed, he couldn't hold back any longer and confessed everything. He had accidentally discovered that it wasn't Jing Ruxiu who poisoned the fox. The true culprit was Yan Shuiyao, the prime minister's daughter, the very woman who had cried so heartbreakingly while holding the fox's body. "I didn't dare speak out, considering your feelings for Miss Yan, but in doing so, I've wronged Madam." This belated truth hit Lu Jisheng like a punch to the gut, leaving him cold and numb, as if he had fallen into an icy abyss. The memory of her words suddenly echoed in his ears, the words she had said while staring at the candlelight, her lips pressed together in stubborn defiance. "You don't have to love me, but you cannot falsely accuse me." He had never believed her, not once. And he had never doubted his childhood friend. But now, as he pieced everything together, the details from the past began to chill him to the bone. What kind of secrets lay behind that once innocent face? Her sudden heart condition had delayed him, and if things had gone differently, Jing Ruxiu would have died in the forest. His heart surged with guilt and fear. As he looked down at the pale face lying in the bed, tears stung his eyes. He grasped her hand, trembling with regret and fear. Leaning close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin, he whispered, Ruxiu, wake up. I won't leave you alone again." It was as if the nightmare had finally ended, and heaven had shown mercy, granting them a new dream. Not only did Jing Ruxiu recover under Lu Jisheng's devoted care, but one day, Lu Jisheng told her that he wanted to live a good life with her. What did living a good life mean? Jing Ruxiu's breath caught in her throat, almost thinking he was joking. But he was serious. He looked at her with a gentle, teasing smile and said, slowly and deliberately, "Living a good life means eating meals with you every day, sleeping together, watching the mist rise in spring and the willows turn green. You'll practice with your spear in front of the pavilion, and I'll paint. We'll grow old together, always by each other's side." He paused, his smile deepening, becoming more sincere. "We'll never leave each other." Jing Ruxiu's heart pounded, almost unable to believe it. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, she foolishly asked, "And what about Yao Yao?" Lu Jisheng's smile faltered, but he hugged the silly girl tightly, taking a deep breath. Yao Yao is gone. Everything from the past is gone. Both Yao Yao were dead, buried along with all the past memories. From now on, it would just be them, Zhangshan Ruxiu, Xinge Bianwu. That was, perhaps, the happiest time in Jing Ruxiu's life. She and Lu Jisheng, One skilled in martial arts, the other in literature, worked side by side in court, supporting the emperor and standing shoulder to shoulder. She would watch him handle official documents, his pen flowing smoothly, resolving every case with precision and clarity. He would visit her at the military camp, watching her command from atop the platform, her delicate brows and fair skin framed by her military uniform, radiating bravery and strength. They would exchange glances across the crowd, smiling at each other. Sometimes, a bold new recruit would steal a glance at them, and Jing Rushio's face would flush with embarrassment. She would cough twice, raising her voice to cover her nervous heartbeat. "What are you looking at? Stand up straight, all of you. No one is allowed to move." Lu Jisheng, unable to suppress his laughter, would join in on the teasing, playfully echoing her authority. "Did you hear that? Listen to the general." A resounding response would follow. "Yes, general's husband." Because of Lu Jisheng's unique status as the husband of the kingdom's first female general, he earned the nickname General's Husband, which quickly spread throughout the capital, becoming famous in Liangdu. On the platform, Jing Rushio's face grew even redder, while the general's husband below only laughed more heartily, his eyes sparkling with mischief. The wind blew past, the geese flew across the sky, and the autumn air was crisp and cool, just a perfect autumn day. As the early winter approached, Lu Jisheng's birthday arrived. Jing Rushio had been preparing for a long time, planning to host a grand banquet in celebration, honoring him as his wife, celebrating the many years to come. Lu Jisheng was overjoyed in his heart, though he pretended to be concerned, worrying that Jing Rushio might tire herself out with all the preparations. Jing Rushio leaned against his chest, her delicate hand looped around his neck as they sat together under the veranda, gazing at the moon. In the gentle night breeze, she suddenly turned to him, her eyes glistening, and with a soft smile, she whispered, "Husband, for your next birthday, the birthday after that, and every birthday from now on, I will celebrate with you and be by your side. Is that all right?" Her voice was so tender and sweet that it melted Lu Jisheng's heart. He nodded vigorously, unable to resist leaning in and softly kissing her lips. Their bodies intertwined. The moment deepened like fine wine, sweeter than the moonlight itself. Fireworks bloomed in the sky. Wine and laughter filled the air, and the general's mansion was bustling with life on that day. Guests streamed in and out. Late in the evening, a particularly important guest arrived in secret, shocking and delighting Jing Rushio as she and the entire courtyard of civil and military officials knelt. Long live His Majesty. The emperor's favor was clear. For the Son of Heaven to personally come and celebrate Lu Jisheng's birthday, what an immense honor. Jing Rushio kept glancing toward the gate, eagerly waiting for Lu Jisheng to return. Lately, severe flooding in the Sioux region had kept him extremely busy, sometimes working through the night at the courthouse. Jing Rushio had been heartbroken seeing him so worn out, so she had specifically asked him to come home early today to relax and enjoy the celebration. But as the night grew darker and the banquet was about to begin, there was still no sign of Lu Jisheng. The servant she sent to find him came back saying that the Dali temple was empty and there was no trace of him anywhere. Jing Rushio could no longer sit still. Without revealing her concern, she quietly called for the old steward to continue entertaining the guests while she slipped out the back gate and rode into the night. The wind howled, the cold pierced her skin, and her heart raced in fear, dreading that something had happened to Lu Jisheng. But as she neared the city's moat, she caught sight of 2 river lanterns floating up and down on the water. Her heart skipped a beat. Dismounting her horse, she held her breath and quietly approached, leading the horse by its reins. "Ah Sheng, Yao Yao always knew you hadn't changed. You're still Yao Yao's Ah Sheng." In the darkness, under the cover of night, Jing Rushio heard a woman's soft voice. By the riverbank, 2 familiar figures were locked in a tight embrace, the air thick with the smell of alcohol and heated passion. Jing Rushio froze, her legs stiff, unable to tell north from south. "Husband, you must come home early." Her voice echoed faintly in the wind, but it was soon drowned out by the heavy breaths from the riverbank. The night wind blew, scattering her words like a fragile joke. Clouds and mud, she muttered to herself, her steps faltering as she turned and led her horse away. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. Instead, the indecent sounds from behind grew even clearer. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if she were walking on blades. Images flashed through her mind, shattering into countless fragments. What night was this? Heaven's mercy had finally run out, and her beautiful dream was coming to an end. Something surged in her chest, an overwhelming nausea she couldn't hold back. She stumbled to a willow tree and vomited violently. And then, the tears that had been trapped in her eyes finally burst forth, falling freely in the night wind, soaking her world in sorrow. Clouds and mud. After all the effort she had put in, she was still the mud he didn't want. The banquet began in splendor, but ended in awkwardness. Jing Ruxiu's smile had become almost rigid by the time the feast hastily concluded. As the officials left, they all shook their heads in regret, saying, "Since Lord Lu is ill, it's best not to disturb him. He is so dedicated to the people, working tirelessly. Madam, you must take good care of him." Only the emperor wasn't disheartened. In fact, as the officials dispersed, he turned to Jing Ruxiu, who was the last to see him out, and said, "I came today not only to celebrate Lu Jisheng's birthday, but also with another intention, focused on you, General." Jing Ruxiu's head snapped up, startled. The emperor's expression was grave, his eyes filled with worry. "General, you may not know this, but news came yesterday of an attack on the northern border. The entire city is under siege." This was an unexpected disaster for Huai Kingdom, sudden and fierce, with a complexity that left everyone unprepared. The emperor, in his frustration, thought of the first female general he had personally appointed. "This mission is extremely dangerous. I ask you once more, General, do you truly have no regrets?" Even the emperor hadn't expected Jing Ruxiu to agree so quickly, almost as if she couldn't wait to leave Liangdu and rush to the battlefield. Greatly reassured, the emperor solemnly addressed Jing Ruxiu, who knelt beneath the fireworks lighting up the sky. "Very well, General Jing, take this decree. I command you to lead the army, set out as soon as possible, and crush the northern D." Lu Jisheng returned to the general's mansion the next morning, reeking of alcohol and with his clothes disheveled. He staggered through the halls looking for Jing Ruxiu. When he pushed open the door to her room, she was sitting at the table, polishing her silver spear. She looked up at him, her eyes slightly red, but she smiled at him warmly. "Husband, you're back." Lu Jisheng's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice trembling. "Ruxiu, I have something I need to discuss with you." He reached out, trying to place a hand on her shoulder, hesitating as he prepared to confess everything. "Last night, the reason I didn't come back was because... Husband, here's your birthday present. Do you like it?" Jing Ruxiu interrupted him, pulling out a small sachet she had made over the past few days. She smiled and casually tied it to his waist. Lu Jisheng froze, unable to move. He let her draw closer, her hair brushing against him. Her hands, more accustomed to wielding a spear than a needle, had crafted a clumsy sachet. Yet Lu Jisheng held it gently, stroking it as if it were a treasure, and pulled Jing Ruxiu into his arms. The words he had meant to say somehow got stuck in his throat. "Let this moment last a little longer. Just a little longer." The room fell silent, their breaths mingling. After a long while, it was Jing Ruxiu who gently pushed him away. She rubbed her eyes, grabbed the bowl of soup from the table, and smiled at him tenderly. "Husband, I'm heading to the training grounds. Drink this soup and get some rest. We can talk when I return, all right?" Lu Jisheng, his mind in turmoil, nodded. But then he reached out, grabbing her hand as she was about to leave. "Ruxiu, when you come back, I have something important to discuss with you." Jing Ruxiu's nose stung with emotion, but she bit her lip and nodded. Taking her silver spear, she walked quickly out the door, her vision finally blurring with tears. Husband, goodbye. The wind blew through the courtyard, scattering the fallen plum blossoms, leaving only their lingering fragrance. That was the last time Lu Jisheng saw Jing Ruxiu. He drank the sedative-laced soup she had prepared and slept for 2 days straight. When he awoke, all that remained was a divorce letter, written in her hand. All that was left was for him to sign, and she would be gone from his life, moving out of the general's mansion. She had learned to write quite a few characters now, even though each word had been written with great difficulty, her tears smudging the ink as she went. She said she didn't want to make things hard for him. She knew what he wanted to discuss. She hadn't had the courage to hear it, but she was willing to let him go, to give him the freedom he longed for, to let the true lovers finally be together. After all, she was still grateful to him. Even if it had been out of obligation, he had made her dream feel so wonderfully real. Lu Jisheng was in shock, clutching the divorce letter in disbelief. No, this isn't right. He panicked completely, but there was no chance for an explanation. By now, Jing Ruxiu had already mounted her horse and was headed to the battlefield far beyond the city walls. He knew she must have seen something that night. Otherwise, she wouldn't have reacted like this. But who could have predicted how absurd the situation had been? Even he couldn't forgive himself. That night, he had been on his way back to the general's mansion when Yan Shuiyao stopped him. The former prime minister's daughter, once the pride of the capital, had cried until her eyes were swollen. Clinging to his sleeve, she had begged to spend one last birthday with him, promising not to bother him again afterward. His heart had softened. Thinking it would be best to sever their ties completely, he agreed to spend some time with her, intending to make a clean break with the past. But after drinking the wine she had brought, his mind became clouded, his body heated, and he lost control of his actions. By the time he woke in the inn, it was too late to undo his mistake. Ah, Sheng, I had no choice but to do this. Now that it's come to this, you can't just walk away. Yan Shuiyao sobbed uncontrollably in the bed, while Lu Jisheng was consumed with despair, so much so that he wanted to strangle her. But even if it had been a trap, he had still dishonored her. Whether he liked it or not, he had to take responsibility. What he had wanted to discuss with Jing Ruxiu was his plan to bring Yan Shuiyao into their home. He couldn't bring himself to say it, but he didn't want to deceive her either. He had intended to come clean when she returned, to beg for her forgiveness no matter what. But she had left him a divorce letter instead, disappearing without a word to the borderlands, not even leaving him a chance to say goodbye. Why had she made the decision for him? Why hadn't she asked him? Foolish mud. Reaching for the sachet tied to his waist, Lu Jisheng shuddered, overcome with grief, and tore the divorce letter into pieces. Jing Ruxiu, don't think you can force me out of the general's mansion. You may be running to the battlefield, but I can chase you all the way to the border. In the 12th year of Yong'an, war raged at the northern border, in the city of Sui. Amidst the smoke and flames of battle, a message from Liangdu slipped through. Lord Lu Jisheng was set to marry the prime minister's daughter, Yan Shuiyao. The wedding preparations were grand, and the entire city's attention was on the event. Jing Ruxiu, feeling nauseous, frowned as she fought back the urge to vomit. Pressing her hand to her stomach, her face pale, she said to her attendant, "There's no need to bring me any more news from Liangdu." The armies were locked in a final, decisive battle. She could not afford to be distracted, nor did she want her heart to be broken. Ah, Sheng, you have to marry me before you can leave. Do you really think my father would let you go to the battlefield otherwise? Yan Shuiyao's words echoed endlessly in Lu Jisheng's ears. He numbly tried on his wedding robe, wishing only to hurry through the wretched ceremony so he could rush to the battlefield, to his foolish Ruxiu. Every letter he sent had been returned unopened. She hadn't even looked at them. He grew increasingly frantic, desperate to fly to her side and explain everything. Winter had already set in, and snowflakes fell heavily from the sky, blanketing the world in white. Lu Jisheng gazed out the window, waiting for her distant figure to return. Even though he was anxious, he still held on to his hope. He imagined that after winter came spring, and the willow trees along the banks would turn green. He would take her on horseback to see the wind sweep the clouds and the water ripple below. They still had so many days ahead of them. They had promised to grow old together, and there was still so much time left for that. But little did he know, life was unpredictable. One moment too late, and you could be too late for a lifetime. As the red lanterns swayed in the wind, the wedding at the Liu mansion had only just begun when the old steward burst in, breathless and frantic. Tears streaming down his face, he collapsed to the floor. "Young master, Madam has died in battle." It was as if the sky had fallen. Liu Jixing stood frozen, trembling in the middle of the hall. The horses neighed, the wind and snow howled ever harder. Still dressed in his wedding robes, Liu Jixing rode wildly toward the outskirts of the city. 10 miles out, he met the returning army. The soldiers carrying the coffin recognized him, their throats tightening with grief. "General's husband, please, accept our condolences." With bloodshot eyes, Liu Jixing shoved aside the coffin lid. Even as he saw the lifeless body inside, her face still peaceful as if in sleep, he refused to believe it. She was truly gone forever. "Ruxiu." His anguished cry tore through the sky, echoing over the snow-covered land. The iron-willed soldiers wept openly. The battle had been won, but in the chaos afterward, General Jing had been ambushed. She had fallen from her horse, and for some reason, she had instinctively shielded her abdomen, giving the enemy the perfect chance to strike her down with a single sword thrust. Only after the military doctors examined her did the truth come out. General Jing had been 3 months pregnant. 3 months. It was the same time she had written the divorce letter and set off for the battlefield. She hadn't even told him. With trembling hands, his eyes wide with grief, Liu Jixing clutched her body tightly, crying out in agony, "No!" As he held her, the front of her robes came loose, and something fell from her grasp. It was a folding fan, tumbling into the snow. Zhongshan Ruxiu, Shunga Bianwu. From Liangdu to the battlefield, Jing Ruxiu had only brought this one item with her. After the initial pain had passed, only endless longing remained. Every time she awoke from a dreamless sleep, listening to the horns outside, she would clutch this fan tightly to her chest, finding some semblance of comfort in the otherwise unbearable darkness. The wind whipped through the tent, and she could almost hear the soft words spoken in the past. Living a good life means eating meals with you every day, sleeping together, watching the spring mist rise and the willows turn green. You'll practice with your spear in front of the pavilion, and I'll paint. We'll grow old together, always by each other's side. Never leaving, never forsaking. Her lips moved silently as the tears slipped down her face, soaking into the pillow beneath her unnoticed.